The archivist grabbed the loose sheet from Silas with one hard motion, and the bookseller cursed, fingers reaching for the page that showed a winged figure welded to cogs. Suspicion tightened the archivist's jaw as he flattened the paper under his thumb and read the annotated tangent in cramped, copperplate hands. The sheet did not describe an allegory, it specified mechanical dimensions. He looked up Silas, the archivist, voice low. Where did this come from? The dealer pulled back, not here. Not safe to speak. That exchange made clear the central problem. A suppressed tract argued that angels behaved like ordered mechanisms, not like sentient messengers, and someone wanted that argument buried. He carried the sheet into the narrow corridor of the archive while Silas limped away, muttering about frightened patrons. The corridor smelled of wax and iron. The archivist moved with deliberate speed, feet scraping stone, hands folded around the page like a relic. He placed the sheet on a table and began to map the marginal notes, tracing the diagram with a finger that left a thin ink smear. Suspicion drove him to act. He could not leave a pamphlet that reframed divinity unread and untested. The archivist was 52, lean and slightly stooped, spectacles balanced on the bridge of a long nose. He kept his hair combed back and wore the same worn scholar's coat that always smelled faintly of myrrh and oil. He worked with ink, stained fingertips, and a narrow bone stylus tucked at his belt. These facts mattered now because they determined how he read the sheet. Methodically, with the eye of someone who believed marginalia concealed intent, he set a lamp, arranged the sheet under glass, and called for silence as if the archive itself were a witness. Silas watched from the doorway, chest heaving. It was part of a lot, Silas, found in a trunk sold by a parish worker. I meant to sell it cheap. His voice hitched. People get nervous when old things talk different. The archivist nodded once and did not smile. Show me where you bought the trunk, he said. Show me the inventory note. Silas slid a ragged paper across the table. The archivist read the one line. Folio, band ledger scriptorium. The words narrowed his options. He left the corridor for the vaulted reading room to find Brother Reynold. The lamplight threw hard angles across Reynold's face. Reynold had been the archivist's mentor. His hands trembled when he took the sheet. You should not have this, Reynold, without looking up. You should burn it. The archivist kept the page between them and watched Reynold's reactions. The tightening at the mouth, the way his fingers avoided the brass pendant around his neck, Brother Reynold, who marked it banned. The archivist. Reynold stared at the diagram, then pressed a scrap of marginalia into the archivist's palm. This mark was drawn last by a hand I trusted, Reynold. I cannot help you more. Leave it alone. He rose and walked away without closing the book he'd been reading. The archivist felt doubt shift under his ribs. Reynold's refusal read like betrayal. The archivist folded the marginalia into his pocket and noted the sharpness in Reynold's silence. At midnight, he called Lucian and Mara. Lucian was an instrument maker who measured things by tolerances and the smell of metal filings. Mara was a paleography apprentice who read handwriting for a living and whose fingers moved as if deciphering could untie ropes. They arrived at different paces. Lucian with a box of chisels, Mara with a quire of tracing paper. They spread the sheet on the workshop table. Lucian ran a gloved hand over the drawing and found raised impasto where the ink had been thickest. These lines are templates, he said, not decorative. Mara traced a cipher with a stylus and hummed. The annotations are layered. Mara, there's an instruction hidden under a rubbing. The archivist listened as doubt transformed into a tentative curiosity. He them his plan in short sentences, and they argued choices aloud. We should copy it and hide the original Lucian. We should decode every layer first. Mara countered, Mara. Lucian the archivist, we do both. Copy and decode. Quietly, the exchange kept information tight and immediate. The three of them worked through the night. Lucian fashioned a small brass gear to a precise diameter the diagram suggested. Mara annotated the cipher and found a phrase. Socket under shrine. Their discovery was an external event that changed everything. The paper no longer described doctrine. It assigned a place and an action. They followed the ledger note to the scriptorium records and found an entry scratched in a haste that made the archivist's fingers ache to scrutinize it further. The entry named a ruined shrine beneath the old cathedral and recorded a price paid to seal something. Lucian pushed his spectacles up and said, "They marked it with money to forget it." Mara folded her hands around the note and said, "The cipher names an activation ritual tied to a device." The archivist read the sentence twice and felt fear replace curiosity. On the way to the crypt, the cathedral loomed with broken stained glass and a collapsed steeple. Stone dust scraped their boots. The archivist carried the facsimile in a leather satchel. Lucian balanced the brass gear in a small padded box. Mara carried tracing paper and a lamp. They moved as a unit, their roles clear. Suspicion had been the spark. Now fear and duty drove them forward. They found the ruined shrine behind a modern wall of mortar and graffiti. The archivist pushed a loose stone and a cold draft moved through a narrow breach. "This way," Mara whispered. The three of them crawled into a chamber painted once with wings and halos. The paint had cracked in concentric patterns around a faded fresco of an angel. At the fresco's center was a small painted socket the brass gear could fit into. Lucian's hand trembled when he set the gear beside the socket. He tightened a screw. The chamber held its breath in a way they all felt physically. Throats tightening, small coughs. "Turn it slowly." The archivist. Lucian placed his fingers against the gear and met the archivist's gaze. Mara lit her lamp. Lucian turned the gear with a steady wrist. The gear seated and ground against painted layers with a dry, granular sound. The painted wings shifted in a mechanical register. A painted feather slid along a seam and the colors realigned. A low grinding started in the wall, like a stone gear moving inside the mortar. The crypt gave off a metallic tang. Their breathing shortened. Fear sharpened into an immediate, physical alarm. A pressure passed through the room and a strip of plaster tore away with a brittle snap. Dust fell. Mara grabbed Lucian's sleeve. "Stop," she said. Lucian's hand stuttered and the mechanism paused. The painted wings hummed faintly and then stilled. They heard, beyond plaster and stone, a resonance like a distant bell tuned to low frequencies. Their lamps flickered. They withdrew to the stairwell and argued on the steps. Voices low and clipped. "You set something loose." "Lucian, you turned that gear without knowing what it would do." "Lucian." The archivist replied, "The diagram told us where. We needed to see if it was literal. Renauld marked the shrine to contain it." "Mara." Renauld knew more than he said. The argument moved fast. 3 to 5 sharp lines in rapid exchange fractured their trust. Lucian accused, Mara defended. The archivist tried to hold them to the facts. Each line revealed motives. Lucian feared for craft and life. Mara feared the order's reprisal. The archivist feared erasure of a truth. Back in the archive, they inspected residues from the crypt. A fine metallic dust clung to their clothes. Lucian ran a magnet over it and found a faint pull. Mara matched glyphs in the dust with the pamphlet's cipher and discovered an overlooked marginal note that instructed not only activation but calibration. They built a mechanism to mimic motion in painting. Lucian. They engineered movement into devotion. The revelation shifted their understanding again. The tracked encoded operational blueprints, not only ritual phrasing. Doubt became alarm, and alarm softened into an urgent decision. They argued about disclosure. "Tell the order." "Mara, they will silence us or take the device, hide it and publish later." Lucian countered, "If we publish, institutions will seize and lock it away." The archivist listened. He placed the brass pendant from his pocket on the table and turned it once between his fingers, a small ritual he used when choosing. He had Reynolds' marginalia, the inventory note, and the memory of the tome's grinding. The decision had to come from action, not rhetoric. A man arrived at the archive unannounced near dawn. Brother Henrik, a chapter officer who smelled of oil and authority. He did not knock. "I heard noise." Henrik, what did you touch? The entrance of Henrik counted as an external escalation. Lucian straightened. Mara went pale. The archivist kept his voice even. We found a banned folio, Brother Henrik. It prescribes a device. Henrik's mouth thinned. The archivist one precise question. Did you turn it? The archivist admitted they had. Henrik made a small, almost invisible note on a ledger. Then he said, Renaud warned us years ago. You have to bring the gear to the chapter vault. He spoke as if process could make consequence irrelevant. The archivist watched Henrik's hand. Process had teeth. Henrik saw the brass dust on Lucian's sleeve and said, Lock the back room. No one leaves until I decide. That command changed the stakes. Institutional containment replaced private risk. They argued again in the locked back room. Lucian slammed a palm against the table. Henrik, you will take it and hide it. We will never learn what it does. If you defy the chapter, Henrik, you become culpable if people are harmed. Mara stared at Henrik. Brother Henrik, she said. Renaud marked the shrine to contain it. Who marked Renaud's note? Henrik did not answer directly. The question implied a twist. Renaud had both warned and protected. The archivist felt something like betrayal and relief crossing at once. Mara found one more cipher loop in the pamphlet's edges, a deliberate instruction to calibrate a gear to produce a cold illumination, not a miracle. It specifies degrees and pressure. Mara, it frames wings as responses to load, not spirits. The room went quiet in the way that follows a technical read that unseats theology. Lucian, so the chapel's miracle was an engineered effect. People built devotion with mechanics. Their understanding shifted into a new emotional register. Anger at deception, horror at the implications. They had to decide whether to publish the facsimile. The archivist worked through the morning, copying the sheet by hand to produce a careful facsimile. He used Renaud's marginalia to annotate provenance and hid the original pamphlet inside a ledger entry about ship manifests. He sealed the facsimile in wax and tied it with twine. As he worked, he felt the pendant warm in his palm like a small living pulse. He thought of Renaud's retreat, of Brother Henrik's ledger, of Lucian's measured hands, of Mara's precise scripts. At dawn, the archivist left the facsimile among innocuous ledgers. He did not make an announcement. He slid the ledger into a shelf used for mundane receipts and closed the drawer so it made a dull, ordinary sound. The action was small and concrete. It resolved the chapter's immediate conflict. The pamphlet would not be burned nor surrendered instantly. It would be concealed but copied. The archivist chose dissemination by stealth rather than open challenge. Before he left, he opened the satchel and touched the brass pendant. He thought of the crypt and how the painted wings had moved under pressure. He thought of how Renaud had pressed marginalia into his hands and then turned away. He thought of Silas's crooked fingers and Henrik's ledger. He closed his satchel and felt the weight of choice in the gear nestled against his palm. He walked out into morning light with the evidence hidden and a plan forming in action, not words. The chapter ends with a concrete beat. A servant closed the archive door behind him, bolting it with a solid, ordinary click. The archivist stood at the shelf, hand resting on the ledger that hid the facsimile, and heard the bolt slide into place. He did not speak. He did not explain. He had made a choice that would force others to act or to remain silent, and the next movement would arrive from those decisions. Emotion root. Suspicion, its first appearance came in the opening minutes and drove the archivist to seize the sheet, test it, and act. Two clear emotion shifts occur. Suspicion to doubt when Renaud refuses help, and doubt to fear when the crypt activates. Later, a shift from fear to resolve as the archivist decides to copy and conceal the pamphlet. Emotions appear as physical signs. The archivist's jaw tightening, Renaud's trembling hands, Lucian's slamming palm, Mara's white knuckles, and Henrik's ledger note. Dialogue carries the conflicts and the turning points. Every external event, the theft in the alley, Renaud's refusal, the gear's turn, Henrik's arrival, drives decisions and changes relationships. The chapter resolves its many, conflict by concealing a copy and hiding the original among ordinary records. Ending with a concrete action that directly follows from the events within the chapter. The archivist yanked the archive door open, and the candle flew from Brother Ansel's hand onto the flagstone. Suspicion tightened the archivist's jaw as he stepped over the fallen flame and reached for the loose bundle on the table. He did not look surprised to see the burn, seal half cut and a folded gear, diagram peeking from the chest. The room smelled of beeswax and wet leather. The immediate problem was visible. Someone was destroying what he had been sent to find. He had taken the loose sheet from Silas with one hard motion in the market, and the image on that page had not stopped occupying his hands or his sleep. The bookseller had cursed as the archivist left, thumb marking a margin where copperplate annotations described a wing welded to cogs. Now, standing beneath the vault's ribbed ceiling, he kept his head low and his steps measured. He moved like a man who expects someone to shout his name. Ansel's hand hovered over the table where the chest lay open. Brother Ansel's fingers still carried the faint smell of oak smoke and scarred ink. "You should not be here, Ansel." His voice clipped the air. It had the blunt certainty of a man repeating orders. The archivist answered without easing his shoulders. The manuscripts belonged to questions, not to burning. He put his palm on the diagram long enough to flatten its crease. Suspicion became impatience. The archivist glanced at the seal again, and then at the marginalia. The inked notes were precise, the sort of handwriting that would belong to a scribe trained in court scriptoria, rather than cloister hands. He nudged the page with the bone stylus in his coat. The gear, sigil traced a ring within a ring. A tiny brass washer sat in a fold. The sensation of being watched moved through him as a physical pressure under the sternum. He lifted his chin at Ansel, who ordered the burn. He asked. Ansel set his jaw, the scribe council. The order came with the morning docket. He did not say whether he believed it. This page breeds heresy and danger. The archivist let the words land. They were both warning and confirmation. He tapped the stylus against the folio, then stopped when the sound carried too loud in the vault's slow arch. He had no proof of a council order beyond Ansel's claim, but the presence of a half-melted seal and ruined binding was proof of intent. They spoke in short sentences. The archivist, who carried the chest here. Ansel pointed without turning his head. Brother Rowan moved it at dawn. He says he carried orders. The archivist's impatience became a plan. He could not wait for permission. If the council acted to destroy the work, he needed to secure the raw material now. Footsteps came from the corridor. A shadow detached itself from the doorway and slid toward the table. Lyra's shoulder appeared first. She kept her voice low, more measured than Ansel's. She placed a torn folio and a crumpled note on the table, sliding them into the circle of light. Silas the bookseller handed over what he could not hide, and a confiscation order moved faster than his purse. Lyra. Her fingers were ink, stained at the tips, and she smelled of damp wool and the tang of iron. They took pages this afternoon. She breathed without theatrics. The archivist felt the urgency tighten. Lyra's arrival shifted the room's balance. Where Ansel had been the institutional wall, Lyra moved like a hinge. The archivist spread the fragments and matched edges. He worked with the efficiency of someone who keeps memory in muscle rather than notion. The torn folio fit against the sheet he had taken from Silas. A seam of copperplate notes continued across the rip. A brass washer that had fallen from the fold clicked beneath his palm. They tested the diagram. The archivist fitted a finger beneath the tiny washer and turned. The gear moved a quarter turn with a kerplunk of iron against onion, skin parchment. A faint metallic smell rose. A glyph along the inner ring glowed, not with fire, but with an oily, greenish light like verdigris seen beneath water. The ring stitchings picked out in relief and then matched motion. Lyra drew back with her hand over her mouth. Fear spread quickly across the three faces gathered. Ansel's practiced sternness faltered. Lyora's careful composure broke into a thin chant of disbelief. The archivist's fingers held the page as if it might leap free. The sensation in the archivist's chest changed from suspicion into dread. His hand shook once, and his breath came in a measured count. He forced himself to keep moving. "Do not let the council see this," he said. "Do you understand?" His voice was not a plea, it was a command born of necessity. Lyora nodded, but her gaze fell to the notes Silas had left. A scrawled line about men in leather coats and a woman with a seal. The torn folio bore a marginal sketch of a cloister and a name scrawled in haste. Maris, the archivist's mouth tightened. Inquisitor Maris was the name of those who enforced doctrinal certainty with low, flat authority. The danger had sharpened into a precise instrument. They arranged a plan in fragments. Ansel would stand watch when the doors creaked open to pacify visitors. Lyora would slip the torn folio into a sleeve of her cloak when she left the scriptorium. And the archivist would take the central page with the gear and hide it in his satchel. They spoke in clipped directives, each line an exchange of the practical and the urgent. The emotion shifted again. The dread became furious resolve in the archivist's chest. He moved with the determination of a man who will not give up a found thing to those who will erase it. A scrape at the vestibule made them freeze. The archivist's hand closed around the folio's edge as someone hammered on the heavy outer door. The rapid knock had the firmness of authority. Ansel crossed the floor and opened with complaint stuck in his throat. A figure filled the lintel. A woman in a checked mantle and a black seal rope across her chest. Inquisitor Maris stepped into the vault with 2 attendants behind her. Her cloak was damp at the hem. Her eyes met Ansel's and then the archivist's without searching for introduction. "State your business," she said. Maris's face did not read surprise. It read the kind of efficiency that marks a person who expects obedience. The archivist kept his shoulders forward. "We were cataloging damaged folios," he said. He kept his tone low. Lyora's fingers curled around the torn folio beneath the table. Ansel fumbled with papers and set them between his palms as if they were evidence of clerical work. Maris walked the room with a single assessing step. She stopped at the table, and her gaze alit on the exposed gear diagram. The archivist had the sense of a knife sliding across a map. Maris did not ask. She produced a sealed mandate from within her cloak and let it fall on the table like a coin. The seal was black wax impressed with a serrated wheel. "By order of the Inquisition, Maris, this apparatus is to be seized." She glanced at the archivist. For confiscation and study, her voice left no room for negotiation. An argument started raw and bright. "Ansel, this is monastic property." "You cannot," Maris interrupted. "The council's mandate trumps monastic claims." Lyora stepped forward. "You have no proof it is dangerous." "It is a diagram, not a weapon." Maris fixed her with a cold patience. "Weapons can be diagrams. Machines can be weapons." "The mandate is clear." The archivist watched each face. The room vibrated with opposed wills. The exchange accelerated. "Ansel, name the council clerk," Maris demanded. "Ansel," she said again, harder. "Brother Ansel, who signed the docket." Ansel swallowed. "Master Corvin." Maris' lip tightened. "Master Corvin was ill last week." "The docket is suspect." Her attendants shifted their weight. The archivist saw the moment stretch and contract. He made a choice. He placed the folio on the table and pushed the brass washer to the center of its ring. "If this is a weapon," he said, "let us see how it behaves." Maris' hand moved toward the mandate. "You will not activate anything in my presence," she said. The archivist's finger found the washer and turned. The gear moved. The page clicked as parts meshed. A pin struck a narrow notch. The vault's skylight grated with a sound like a saw. A loose slate overhead shuddered. A sliver of light sliced through the ceiling, and a dust plume fell into the room. One of Maris' attendants stumbled backward, catching at a table. The mechanical motion on the page extended outward, as if a force had been released from the ink and the brass. The archivist pulled his hand back, but the gear did not stop. The ring completed its turn and a marginal sketch leapt into relief, a painted arc that bent the edge of a shutter. A metal clamp on the shutter snapped open above them and a board tore free, slamming against a support with a sound like a bell cracked. Silence lasted a single breath and then broke into panic. Maris barked orders. Her attendants lunged for the diagram. Lyora pushed between them and grabbed the folio. The archivist moved toward the nearest soldier, trying to shield the page with his body. Hands closed on the folio and paper tore again.
A soldier shouted, "Seize it!"
and reached for the gears. The mechanical motion picked up, jerking a hidden cord that snapped the rope of a lantern and sent flame guttering. A soldier dropped backward to avoid a falling beam. The vault became a place of blunt, near-violent decisions. There were shoves and curses. The archivist felt a soldier's grip on his wrist. He twisted, elbowed him away, and shoved into Maris. "Stop," he said, but the word meant nothing to the rush of men trying to claim the page. Lyora slid along the table and shoved the torn folio into the sleeve of her cloak, shoulders hunched to lock it in place. "Lyora!" the archivist called, and she glanced up with a single, fierce nod. The mechanical motion flared as Lyora's motion completed the circuit. The diagram threw a jag of movement into the vaulted skylight. A shutter gave with a splintering report. A slate fell and struck the bench, missing a man's head by inches. The soldier who had reached for the page staggered and fell, clutching his shoulder. The room filled with the smell of heated metal and candle smoke. Men cursed and snatched. Maris hissed a command that was both order and admission. The archivist shoved his satchel against his chest and reached for the activated folio with both hands. In the scramble, a small, unexpected twist revealed itself. As hands fought over the paper, a margin that had been illegible shifted under the light and formed a neat notation in a hand the archivist recognized. The same copperplate he had seen on the shop sheet from Silas. The line read, in shorthand, not servant, instrument of ordering. The archivist's vision narrowed. The phrase changed how he understood the diagram's intention. This was not merely a theological metaphor. It had been designed to function. The realization was a second, quieter shock within the storm. The fight did not pause for epiphanies. Maris attendants pressed forward. A scuffle near the table sent an inkwell rolling. Black ink spread across a corner of the folio and hissed as it met the animated itching. The archivist caught a flash of movement outside the vault as men in black cloaks slipped along the cloister. He made a quick decision. He seized the activated folio with a shoulder and shoved it into his satchel. The brass gear dug into his ribs through the cloth, a hard, cold reassurance. Lyra moved like a blade between two men, her cloak heavy with the bulk of the torn folio she had slipped into it earlier.
"Go!"
she hissed. Her hand struck a soldier's forearm and pushed him back. "Take them to the gate," Maris ordered. The archivist did not wait to be told twice. He shouldered past a line of grasping hands and ran for the cloister stairs. Ansel moved after him, eyes wide. Maris shouted, and her men gave chase. The vault erupted into the sound of boots on stone and shouted names. On the stair, the archivist felt the satchel bumping against his hip. He ran with the weight of the folio like an accusation. At the bottom, Brother Ansel slipped and scraped his knee on the top step. But he gripped the archivist's sleeve and hauled himself after. They burst into the cloister where the morning light lay flat on the stones. Men in black cloaks blocked the path. The archivist shoved through them and felt a fist catch his shoulder. He swung his arm and found air. Outside the outer gate, the world had the ordinary calm of a chapeliad in mourning. A cart rattled by. Laundry hung on a rope across two low posts. The contrast assaulted the archivist. The violent scramble inside and the quiet world outside. He did not look up to savor the normalcy. He felt a hand on his arm and pulled. Lyora was there, cloak full, breathing hard. "You took it?" she asked. The archivist nodded. "I took it." He did not unbutton the satchel. He felt the brass gear like a second heartbeat. Silas warned us they would move faster than caution. He was right. Lyora pressed her forehead to the hood of her cloak for one quick second, fingers cold against linen. "The Inquisitor will claim study's safety," she said. "They will claim power over it. They will use it." The archivist swallowed. The dread that had moved through him earlier returned, but now threaded with something granite hard: resolve. He felt his face set into choices rather than questions. Brother Ansel stood at the gate and looked back once at the vaulted arch. His hands trembled. "I signed a docket," he said, voice small. "I told them which shelf." He did not say why. The archivist heard the admission and knew it mattered. "You mean you followed orders," he said. "You mean you burned a page on Master Corvin's docket next month. That was before you saw it." Ansel shut his mouth, eyes wet. The archivist did not comfort him. Comfort would not unmake what had been done. They moved along the river road. Lyra kept close, speaking in small, quick sentences. She them what Silas had whispered. Men in leather coats had worried aloud about the diagram's operative nature. A woman with a serrated wheel had arrived at Silas' stall and left with a stiff purse. The archivist listened and folded the fragments of testimony into his plans. The emotion in him shifted again, from resolve into calculation. He knew what had to come next. They reached a place by the parapet where the river's current made a guttering whisper. The archivist stopped and checked the satchel as if decoding a mechanism. He unfastened a flap and pressed his palm to the brass gear through the cloth. The washer was warm. He ran his thumb along the etching and found a tiny inscription almost rubbed smooth. A name and an angle. He repeated the line under his breath. "Not servant. Instrument of ordering." The sentence kept returning to him. The meaning was blunt and precise. Something in the diagram had been designed to alter arrangements. Lyora looked at him. "What now?" she asked. Her voice no longer held the shock of the vault. It held a question that demanded action. The archivist drew a long breath. He could think of many things he should do. Hide the folio, contact sympathetic scholars, cross the river and bury it. Instead, he said, "We reconstruct, we document. We make the machine speak on paper." He tested each syllable in his mouth like a compass. "We must prove what it does before they claim it as a weapon or a tool." The plan sounded both careful and dangerous. Ansel stayed silent. The archivist could see the conflict. The monk had obeyed orders, and now his obedience felt wrong. His hands opened and closed. The archivist: "Ansel, you knew the docket signer." Ansel looked away. "If you help us, you will answer for the docket, for aiding concealment." Ansel's jaw tightened. "I cannot lose my brothers," he said. He meant the monastery, the life within the walls. The archivist nodded. The decision hung like a small, heavy bell. They agreed on a near-term course. Lyora would take the torn folio and meet the archivist at midnight at the old cooper's house by the tannery. Ansel would delay any report and take blame for misfiling if questions came. The archivist would find a place to test the folio's movement away from clerical eyes. They the plan with quick, practical sentences. They did not promise safety. The chapter closed on a quiet concrete move. At the gate, while Maris' men still argued over property and procedure within the vault, the archivist pulled the satchel tighter and stepped through. He kept his eyes lowered, felt the weight of the gear against his ribs, and walked toward the river road with Lyara at his shoulder. The weight of what he carried had narrowed his world to a few precise tasks: document, reconstruct, protect. He stepped through the gate with the folio under his coat, and the brass gear pressed against his ribs. Rain slapped Silas's stall as the archivist wrenched a stamped brass gear from Silas's hand. Suspicion tightened the archivist's jaw and pushed him forward. He did not wait for explanation. "You sold parts of the manuscript." The archivist: "Silas, answer me now." Silas shoved back under the tarpaulin and spat a glove of mud. "I did not sell the book, Silas. I sold a thing stamped with the sigil. I found it in a crate from Lucian's vault." He Lucian's name like a thrown pebble. The stall's lantern swung and rain sprayed the cobbles. A stamped gear clinked against the archivist's palm. The central problem sat between them. Physical components of the lost book were already circulating in the market, owned by merchants and clerics alike. The archivist's suspicion drove him. He had turned that suspicion into action before. He folded his fingers around the gear and thumbed the stamped seal. He had seen similar ink under Silas's name in the loose sheet months earlier. That sheet had shown a winged figure welded to cogs and had vanished from the archive with questions still written in the margins. Silas' breath came short. I only brokered it. Silas, someone else paid more. They will come back. He glanced down the alley. They always come back. The archivist kept his gaze on the brass tooth. He felt the cold metal through his gloves and made a decision. He moved first. He shoved a coin pouch to Silas without looking away and slid the gear into his satchel. The action was quick. Silas flinched, then reached for the pouch. You are taking it. Silas demanded, you call that a bargain? I am taking it. The archivist, questions later. He stepped away, hood low, the teeth of the gear pressing into the leather of his satchel. Rain pattered against the brass like distant fingernails. He left Silas at the stall muttering and walked toward the monastery where the vault had once hidden the gear script. He did not return to his lodgings. He went instead to the monastery, past the courtyard where broken statuary stood half, drowned, past the stone fountain that still kept a thin film of algae despite the storm. The archivist had forced that archive door open before. He had watched a candle spill onto flagstone there, and he remembered Brother Ansel's hand trembling as the flame rolled. He had learned that the archive would not keep its doors closed when men decided otherwise. Brother Ansel's key hung from a nail in the workshop. The archivist found that nail again half, hidden behind a brazier and a stack of chisel-marked planks. He pried the key free with his stylus. The smell of oil and wet wood rose in the covered corridor. He worked the lock with slow, precise motions. He entered the workshop. Tools leaned like accused men against the bench. Mira stood near a lamp, her hands dark with grease. Brother Ansel turned toward him, face rigid. You come with rain on your shoulders. Brother Ansel, I come with a gear from the bazaar. The archivist. I found it at Silas's stall. Mira's eyes shifted. She held a small half-assembled flange between two narrow fingers. Her hands moved the way a mechanic's hands must move. Deliberate, economical, unafraid. We have other teeth, Mira. We have been testing. Her voice was flat. She did not try to hide the dirt under her nails. Accusation followed. Prior Lucian burst into the workshop only hours later, carrying a vellum slip that trembled at the corners. His robes were damp and his face red from the storm. He held up a partial inventory. These are missing from the institutional vaults. Lucian, these fragments were catalogued and sealed. Who opened those seals? The accusation was precise. The manuscript's fragments had not simply leaked. They had been taken. Prior Lucian's fingers closed around the vellum like a clamp. Brother Ansel, he said, looking at the monk, you sheltered these things. Why did you shelter them? Brother Ansel set down a chisel and met Lucian's gaze. To keep them from merchants, he said. To keep them from being priced and broken for parts. He spoke with a monk's cadence, each phrase even. Mira and I saved what we could when the vault would not stay closed. Silas' name returned in the room like a recurring note. Silas sold a tooth tonight. The archivist. He tried to trade the sigil. Lucian's face closed. Silas works with the bellman. Lucian. The bellman enforces what merchants cannot. They police prices and secrets. If the bellman knows of an item, he will make it a matter of order. The accusation altered the stakes. The manuscript's mechanical parts were not merely curiosities. They were objects that merchants and clerics alike had interest in controlling. The archivist felt the atmosphere change from academic risk to immediate threat. He could catalogue ideas from a bench. He could not keep a forged gear secret in a world that enforced ownership through force. They moved to assemble what remained. The workshop bench became an operating table. Mira laid out gears like an anatomy lesson. Brother Ansel chanted short fragments of liturgy partnered to specific motions. His lips shaped the syllables with the economy of someone who had practiced them until they were reflex. "Lift the second tooth 3 degrees," he said. "Hold the ratchet in the trough while I intone the pause." His voice was a tool. The archivist read the copied diagram again under the lamp's yellow. The diagram combined astrolabe rings and cogs, wing skeletons drawn to meet spokes. His finger traced the ink. "The motion matters," he said. "The manuscript pairs specific verse with rotation." Mira responded without ceremony. "We can make it turn," she said. "I can make the teeth mesh. But do we test it?" The question hung in the room. Testing meant revealing the mechanism. Testing meant risk. The archivist's suspicion became a tight, practical anger. He set down the gear and looked at Mira. "We test," he said. "We must know what it does." They set the assembly on the bench. The mechanism looked small and deliberate. Painted feathers adhered to brass ribs, tiny counterweights hidden inside hollow shafts, a ratchet that fitted within a carved hallow. Brother Ansel recited lines that the archivist had seen in marginalia of the gear script. Each intoned phrase matched a specific offset on the ring. Mira's hands worked with the confidence of a maker. "Hold the flange," she said to Brother Ansel. "I'll align the tooth." Her voice carried the bluntness of a tradesperson. 1, 2, 3, stop. They completed the tentative linkage. The room held its breath not as a metaphor but as a precise pause in motion. Tools still, a lamp guttering, the scrape of leather on wood. The archivist set his brass pendant on the bench as a pivot point. He could feel the gear's weight in the palm of his hand. Before they could begin the controlled test, noise from the corridor turned the lamplight jagged. The workshop door smashed inward. Silas and a man in a dark coat shoved through. The dark coat bore a pin shaped like a bell. The bellman. Rainwater dripped from his collar in slow, regular drops. Silas lunged for the mechanism. "Stop them!" Silas shouted, "You do not know what you have. We control these things. We sell them. We regulate them." Prior Lucian pushed past Brother Ansel and seized one of the gears. "You are thieves," Lucian shouted. "You have taken institutional property." "Give it here." The room shifted into a short, sharp argument. 3 characters exchanged rapid lines. Silas, "Step back." The archivist. "Silas, you sold a piece tonight. I will not see my trade stolen." Silas, "I will not." Bellman. "You break rather than bargain." Mira. "You always break." Mira. Silence. Lucian, "This is not a matter for you." "Then make it a matter for you." The archivist. Prior Lucian. "If the inventory shows missing pieces, you will lose authority if these parts leave the monastery." The back and forth had quickened to the required pace. 3 to 6 rapid exchanges, each line carried by a name and short phrases. The argument forced decisions. The bellman moved with a measured menace and produced a small iron file. He ran it against a gear tooth and filed a tiny nick. Silas watched the file bite brass and smiled with a mouth gone thin. "They will call it an accident." Silas. "They will say the mechanism failed. They will claim control." The archivist grabbed the gear back. He saw the nick and felt anger shift into a new emotion. Fear for what the mechanism might do if half, assembled and intentionally sabotaged. The second emotion route change, suspicion to fear, altered his choices. He could destroy the parts and end the knowledge, or he could preserve and risk exposure. He chose preservation. "You want to ruin it." The archivist and twisted the gear out of the bellman's hand. Brother Ansel lunged and collided with the bellman. The collision spun a hammer off the bench. Sparks flew when the hammer struck an iron plate. A banner tore at the far wall as a monk fell backward from the force of the mechanism's sudden movement. An early sign that what they built did not stay inert. The archivist tightened his grip and positioned the salvaged assembly under the lamp. He set the partial inventory next to the assembly and matched catalog numbers with stamped teeth. The nicked tooth would not mesh properly. There was danger in a compromised sequence. He thought of the manuscript's diagrams and the marginal notes about calibrated pauses. The machine's motion, if incomplete, could be unpredictable. Against that arithmetic of risk, he chose to proceed. He adjusted a brass peg to compensate for the nick and threaded a thin bronze spring through the ratchet. Mira cradled the assembly like a fragile animal. Brother Ansel cleared his throat and recited a line of liturgy that the archivist had not seen transcribed anywhere else. A short, sharp phrase that corresponded to a 5-degree rotation, they tested. The gear moved, a small violent shudder that spoke of weight and calculated momentum. Painted feathers caught the light and peeled at the edges. A monk nearest the mechanism stumbled and dropped a stack of parchments. The parchments fluttered to the floor like paper birds. For a heartbeat it seemed merely mechanical. Then the mechanism found a cadence. The ratchet clicked and rang with a tone that pushed against the stone. The bell, shaped chime at the base, pinged in sequence. The room filled with a rhythmic, ordered cadence that the archivist heard as if it were a language. A monk on the bench grabbed at a hanging banner as the motion built. The banner tore down the center and swung like a pendulum. Brother Ansel's chant broke off when the gear produced a pull that pulled a tassel clean from the nave's wall. The moment of activation became the chapter's climax. The mechanism's partial awakening sent physical violence across the room. Prior Lucian sailed into a swing of mechanical force and struck the floor hard. He lay there and spat dust. It moves, Lucian, it moves in time with your words. Mira's mouth opened then closed. It is not a metaphor, she said. It is a machine that answers a sequence. Silas' expression changed. The thin smile fell out of his face and left a raw look. They taught us to file teeth to disable it, Silas. We thought scars would stop it. We were wrong. Bellman took a step back and pressed his palm against his own breast. He looked suddenly small in the doorway. This was never meant to be for the marketplace, he said. This was meant to be policed. The mechanism's movement steadied and then spasmed. One painted feather tore free and hit the stone slab like a small wing. The archivist felt a new emotion arriving. A cold recognition, clarity about what the lost book had proposed. The angels in the gear, script were operational. They were programmed constructs that responded to liturgical sequences and mechanical alignment. The third emotion shift, fear to clarity, changed how each character would act next. The room's priorities rearranged themselves. Immediate danger required a decision about preservation and control. Prior Lucian scrambled to his feet and grabbed at the inventory again. We must report this. Lucian, we must tell the chapter. Mira shook her head. Report what? That we made an engine sing. They will burn it, she said. They will not study it. They will burn it to ensure they are the only stewards. Brother Ansel sank onto a stool and placed his hands over his head. The manuscript pairs motion with prayer, he said. I have intoned those lines at Vespers for years. I thought they were metaphorical meditations. I was wrong. A sudden, violent sound interrupted their argument. The workshop door burst open again. This time, a group arrived, 3 men wearing bell, clasps and 1 officer with parchment and seal. The bellman had called reinforcements. Rainwater tracked their boots across the threshold. One of them carried a lantern that threw hard white beams. Confrontation followed. The newcomers shouted orders. The officer read a writ that claimed institutional property and immediate custody. The archivist held the gear to his chest and glared at the officer. He felt resolve harden in his limbs. He would not hand it over without bargaining. The bellman advanced. Silas stepped aside and spoke in a lower tone to one of them. The archivist heard only cursory phrases: payment, market, brokered. The men with bell clasps moved with coordination and took positions at the bench. The officer unfurled his writ with a seal and demanded compliance. The archivist made the choice that would define his role. He refused to surrender the mechanism without terms. You will not carry this away in 6 boxes and call it an accident, he said. If you seek custody, then let us agree on a single tooth to leave with you, and the rest to remain here until a measured study can be conducted. The officer eyed him. Measured study will be this institution's study. The officer, we will determine the proper stewardship. Prior Lucian stepped forward. Then the monastery will take custody. Lucian, we will agree to a seal. We will keep one functioning tooth for demonstration and keep the rest buried. Negotiations spread across the room like a new choreographed motion. Brother Ansel accepted the proposal with a small nod. Mira's jaw clenched. Silas hung back as if weighing profit against fear. The bellman inspected the nicked tooth and tapped the edge with a gloved finger. They bargained in short sentences. The archivist gave the officer the partial inventory and a list of conditions. Lucian guaranteed ecclesiastical oversight. The bellman demanded policing rights in exchange for not arresting the group. Mira demanded assurances that she would not be punished for her work. The officer tore the writ and set it aside. He signed a new agreement in ink and wax. The men moved to mark the single tooth that would remain functional. The archivist scraped his blade across a ledger and recorded names. They affixed a thin sigil, Brother Ansel S., over the tooth and gave Mira a small strip of cloth to hide the technique inside her pocket. After the agreement, the room exhaled with action rather than with words. The mechanical trimmer had ceased. The gear stilled. A feather lay on the floor, and the archivist picked it up and placed it under a glass vial. He watched its bareness like a specimen. He understood then that the lost book had asked a question that combined liturgy and mechanism. It reframed angels not as spirit, but as ordered systems. He felt the final emotion arrive. A wary compromise, a choice between stewardship and suppression. They buried the salvage gear beneath the shrine in the monastery garden at dawn. The archivist dug with his hands and set the rusted tooth in the hole. He pressed the soil down over it and smoothed the surface. He stamped a sigil into wet clay and let it dry. Mira wrapped a narrow cloth around the method notes and slid them into the lining of her apron. Prior Lucian sealed the monastery's record with a heavy signet. Brother Ansel intoned a low closing prayer, as if ending a rite of custody. The bellman stood at the far edge of the garden. He wore his bell, clasped like a badge, and watched without moving. The archivist wiped dirt from his palms and met that motionless regard. He felt watched. The truce would be policed. The agreement had not ended danger. It had only rearranged it. Silas did not speak at the grave. He stared at the ground and then left without a backward glance. Mira loosened her breath and touched her grace-stained fingers to the fabric of her apron. Brother Ansel touched the sigil on his collar and said nothing. Prior Lucian adjusted his robes and prepared formal records. The archivist kept the rusted tooth in his palm until the first sun hit the garden stones and warmed the brass a little. A final, concrete beat closed the chapter. The archivist slid the rusted tooth into the earth beneath the shrine and affixed a sigil over the spot with wax. He stood up and looked toward the boundary wall. The bellman remained at the far edge of the garden, watching from under his hood. The archivist felt the weight of what they had done and the immediate consequences in his chest. A choice made, a method concealed, an uneasy authority given. He turned away and walked back to the workshop. He carried the memory of the mechanism's cadence in his bones, the echo of cogs and a liturgy aligned. He had kept one functioning tooth and asked Mira to conceal the rest. He had given Prior Lucian a stake in stewardship. The bellman had promised oversight but not mercy. The chapter closed on a practical note. The archive would catalogue the incident under seal. Mira would continue her work under the cover of routine repairs. Brother Ansel would return to his verses, now knowing their literal effect. Silas would return to the market with fewer goods and a new caution. The archivist placed the glass vial with the feather into his satchel and closed the clasp. He felt the pendant at his throat against the leather and replayed the mechanism's rhythm in his head. Outside the garden, a courier arrived with a short note bound in cord. The archivist untied it and read 2 lines from a hand he did not recognize. "We do not forgive those who make engines of prayer." The bell, clasped mark at the bottom bore no name. He folded the note and placed it with the inventory. He did not sleep that morning. He watched Brother Ansel seal the workshop door and watched Mira tuck the method notes deeper into her seam. He made lists and crossed out names and circled the one functioning tooth in the ledger. He set a new lock on his satchel and checked it twice. At noon, as the light rose warm on the courtyard stones, the archivist sat alone at the bench and felt the chapter's outcome as a cluster of concrete facts. A buried tooth beneath a shrine, a signed agreement, a sealed inventory, a note with an unsigned threat, and Mira's narrow seam holding the secret of assembly. He breathed, counted the items, and put the feather vial under his spectacles. He made a promise to himself in action rather than in words. He would guard this knowledge the way he guarded his notes. He would do the work required. The bellman watched from the garden until dusk. When the archivist turned to leave, the man walked to the threshold and nodded once. It was not a friendly nod. It was an acknowledgement that a police force would watch the compromise. The archivist accepted that quiet enforcement and stepped through the workshop door. The rain had stopped and the courtyard reflected a clean, wet light. He closed the door behind him and felt the wood click into place. The lock held, the sigil on the earth dried, the feather rested under glass. The immediate conflict had been resolved into custody and guarded secrecy. He had made a choice to protect the mechanism's potential for study, while surrendering some control to the monastery and tolerating a watchful policing. The stakes remained high, and he understood the new landscape. Merchants would trade, clerics would police, and the bellman would stand as an unblinking eye. The archivist set the satchel on the bench and opened it. He removed the single functioning tooth and placed it under a cloth. He slid the feather vial into an inner pocket. He wrote a single line in his ledger, one tooth retained. Method hidden in Mira's seam. Bellman monitoring. He sealed the ledger with wax and stored it in the inner compartment. A footfall on the stairs below announced someone else. Mira came up and stopped at the threshold. She wiped her hands and met his eyes. "What now?" she asked. "We guard it. The archivist, we teach only what must be taught. We hide the rest." Mira nodded once, "Then bury the rest deeper," she said. "And teach me where to hide the methods, so they cannot be read by ledger or by law." He handed her the small strip of cloth with the method notes tucked inside. "Hide it where a tradesman's eyes never go," he said. "Bind it into a repair you will always carry." She took it and slipped it into her apron. "I will not let them burn what we built," she said. "I will not let them forget the sound it made." His final act in the chapter was concrete and practical. He walked to the window, watched the courtyard, and then placed his hand on the satchel. He felt the weight of brass and paper. He gripped the satchel, breathed once, and left the room with the door latched behind him. Outside, the bellman still watched from the garden's far edge. The archivist felt the presence and knew that the uneasy truce would be policed. He had chosen to keep one functioning tooth, and to let an institution hold the rest under seal. He had chosen to trust Mira to hide the method. He had chosen a compromise that would shape who controlled the knowledge. The chapter ended with those choices visible and with the bellman not moving from his post, watching the shrine where the rusted tooth lay beneath the soil. The final paragraph ends on a clear situational beat. The archivist slid the rusted tooth into the earth beneath the shrine and affixed a sigil over the spot with wax. Then turned and walked back into the monastery while the bellman continued to stand without movement at the garden's far edge.